Da. Bună seara, bună ziua de fapt. Numele meu este Octavian Szalad și suntem la cel de-al treilea interviu din cea de-a șasea zi de interviurile Teatrul Azi aici, la Festivalul Shakespeare de la Craiova. Aceste interviuri sunt organizate de Revista Teatrul Azi, revistă editată de Untitled prin Fundația Culturală CAMIL PETRESCU și finanțată de Ministerul Culturii. Vă mulțumim că sunteți în fiecare zi alături de noi la aceste trei întâlniri cu mari artiști, mari critici sau directori de teatre și de festivale. Sper că în această zi toropitoare sunteți acasă și că vă uitați bucuroși la discuția noastră. Invitata noastră din acest ultim podcast al zilei 6 este profesorul universitar Maria Shevtsova, proaspăt laureată a premiului Thalia, premiul de criticii de teatru a Asociației Internaționale a Criticilor de Teatru. Professor Shevtsova, thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for asking me, and I'm thrilled to be with you because I still hold a very good memory of the first time you asked to talk to me, and I was so terribly impressed with your questions and the order in which you put them. I have done a lot of interviewing for the journal I edit, New Theatre Quarterly. I know about editing and talking, and I was really impressed. So it's wonderful that you're here with me again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In our discussion today, I would like to continue our discussion about directing, about directors. You are one of the most important critics that reflected on directors, on the evolution of directors such as Dodin, as Robert Wilson, and also your book 20 Great Directors of the World, which is also translated in Romanian, is one of the most important books that our students still use as a landmark work on this topic. So the first question would be a bit of a casual question. What makes a great director of the world?
Casual question. It's the number one question and the hardest question because all directors are different. Yeah. Now, what makes a Lev Dodin as distinct from, I don't know, Ivo van Hove today, as distinct from an up-and-coming, I think probably becoming a good director at last in Britain called Robert Icke? You know, what makes a good director in different cultures, in different countries at different times? I don't know that I can answer that in a full kind of way because they are all so different. For example, what made everybody here knows about what's his name? Peter Brook.
Yes.
Everyone knows about Peter Brook. He's a great director. Yeah. What made him a great director? First of all, daring. Yeah. When he was just a young man and staging Titus Andronicus, he dared to do something in the British theatre that seemed absolutely incomprehensible. You know, normally you get blood, they pull out a little pill, blood spurts out, the audience doesn't see how it's done, but they get up and they got red all over them. It's crude, kind of old-fashioned, I would even say kind of melodrama theatre tactics. And Peter Brook borrowed something from the Chinese theatre. Also not only the Chinese, but he took it really from the Chinese, so that when her tongue is cut out, Lavinia's tongue is cut out in Titus Andronicus, there is no blood. She pulls out a red thread. It's poetry. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's elegant. That was a mind-blowing event in 1956, you know, and then when he went to work in Paris at the Bouffe du Nord, I was there when he formed that theatre it was in 1974. Oh God, I was a student in Paris. I was lucky to be there on the opening night. Can you imagine this big excitement? We have a big name. We know that he's been supported by the French government, let alone by private forces like the Gulbenkian Foundation, for example. But, you know, what was so startling, what made him such a good director for that? He gave us a sense of vitality of the new. Things were simple, pared back. He started to look for a different kind of language for the actor. a different way of playing rather than illustrative playing or overstated playing. He looked for oblique playing, indirect playing, subtle playing, like the Red Ribbon. They came in running up this lamp, all with fantastic energy. You wouldn't expect that from the beginning of what he started with was Timon of Athens. You wouldn't expect that from a play like the Timon of Athens. I think probably Brooke is a good example too of something else that makes a great director. What I really am convinced makes a great director, no matter where they are or who they are, is their work with the actor. Because without the actor, there is no director. Yeah. And the director needs to be very frank and open with an actor. It is not possible really to control an actor. Some directors make the mistake of telling actors, you do this, do this, do this. The actor has to feel empowered. The actor has to feel that he, she, they own their work in the performance. And Brooke worked a great deal, exploring a great deal with his actors. Nothing was ever fixed. Everything was a process of research. And the research led slowly to the production and the performance. So step one, research, closeness, relationship to the actor, the constructive interchange of ideas and of actions, most of all of just doing, with the actor. The second thing I would say that is absolutely fundamental for a good director, and I'm convinced more of this as I see this falling away now in these last few years. A director needs stability more than an actor. We have lived for the last how many years in society. I'm talking here about, you know, the sort of established countries like Great Britain, France, Germany. Those are the countries that have had time to put their roots in. You have a very different tradition of acting and directing and so on in Romania. And Romania is actually an extremely good example of what we should keep. But you see, the problem was the actor started working everywhere. One night he was working on a production, the next day he was going off to do an advertisement for a toothpaste, the next day he was going off to make a film, the next day he was going off to do something, to be thinking about doing a television program. And so the communion that grows with a group of actors disappears, it becomes evaporated. In other words, what we need is still the notion of an ensemble working together. Because as I have observed again and again and again for the last, how many years is it now that I've been working on directors? Basically since I was a student, since the 70s, you know, when I was in Paris. That's when I started working on directors and with directors. So it's been half a century pretty well, more or less, give or take a couple of decades. But a long time. And so what I've seen is that some of the most inventive, creative work comes from the sharing that comes with people who know each other, who are not afraid of each other, who can make mistakes, who don't have to put on airs to impress somebody. They can feel at home. They can feel like you feel at home. You make a cup of tea, it falls over the floor, nobody loses face. Yeah, just wipe it up and keep going. Do you see what I'm saying? I would say those two qualities are still the fundamentals of what would make a good director. Then we can go on and on about this subject because it's so vast, but it's a very, very important question with your usual understanding of what is important.
You started describing Brooke with this characteristic of being daring, of being courageous. What does being daring and courageous for a director mean? Especially nowadays when a lot of things have happened.
Especially nowadays when not only are there wars and decreasing of money availability and complete disrespect for actors, you know, unless they work in the movies and they become movie stars. Again, it's a very difficult question. Just repeat it again so I can focus on what aspect I want to answer.
What means to be daring for a director now?
First of all, I'd say to be daring now is to defy the pressure of money, the pressure of having to maintain a theatre, the pressure of having to bring in and find audiences. It is a major pressure across the world. It isn't unique to one country. Every country is experiencing the fact, too, that the audience is aging. I was talking about this in my speech for the Thalia, or the Thalia. The aging of the audience. How do we bring in young people? You and I were talking before our official talk about the follow-up from young people or new audiences, working class audiences, their children, who don't have necessarily access to the theatre easily. How do they become interested in and involved in? It isn't enough to see. You need to speak. You need to talk about what you've seen. There needs to be an awakening up of interest. Interest doesn't necessarily come spontaneously. It might have to need a bit of work done for it. So the daring part of it is to maintain a sense of firmness in a world of terrible pressure, in a world of tremendous anxiety that we live in a world of hardship that we live in. People are getting poorer. Ticket prices are going higher. In London, in 1 year, I have seen most theatres double their price. In 1 year, this last year. Because they're anxious to catch up where they lost during COVID. So they need to keep the money running. They need to be able to hire, to invite important directors, to pay the actors. It's costly. Everyone knows this. But a director, I think, has to be very firm and say, I am aware of all this, but I believe this. This is where I want to go, and this is where I will stay. One of the great things about the great directors, Peter Brook, Ariane Nushkin, Robert Wilson, Declan Donnellan, I can think of a whole string of very great directors I've written on and worked with and so on. They've maintained a sense of firmness. They understand the pressures, but they stick to their guns. And they work in the direction that they think is the right one for them. And they do that firmly. They do it with courage. They do it with consistency. They do it with persistence. A director cannot be a weak person. A director cannot cave into pressure. A director has to stand up to pressure, I think.
And then, in this situation, does this institution of the manager-director still work? Should the director get a distance from this fundraising part of the theater work, or these dialogues should still be in equal parts?
I think it's essential to maintain the dialogue. In a theatre, generally, there is the artistic director and the managing director. There has to be dialogue between them. The managing director has to run the building and the money, and the payments and so on. And the managing director can frown and say to the artistic director, "You're spending too much money for this and this. We have to do some cuts." An intelligent director listens carefully and tries and works out how to compromise on one aspect, which is the practical aspects of bringing together people, etc., but at the same time of thinking how to maybe shift the aesthetic so it's a little poorer, but doesn't ruin the principle of the aesthetic. That's very important. And not many directors can actually fight that hard enough. I've seen this young man, Robert Icke, caving into the pressure, I think, in his last work. I was very sad when I saw his Romeo and Juliet in London just a few weeks ago. I felt that he was accepting the pressure when he should be fighting the pressure, or maybe just dialoguing with the pressure, or maybe trying to convince the managing director that he really has to do this rather than this. I think in his case, it's very hard to say. He's 39. He's a young director at 39. I'm hoping he will pull out of this slightly rocky phase that I think he's in and come back to the kind of very firm director I first saw something like 15 years ago, and he was just a kid fundamentally. And also even just 3 years ago, when he did a remarkable production in London that had actually been run through already in Holland when he worked with Ivo van Hove. Directors also need masters. They need points of reference. They need to think, I think, about where their source of learning has come from. In this respect, someone like Ariane Mnouchkine, look how long she's lasted, and with what strength and courage. She has been very, very well financed by the national government, because the funding sources in France are traditionally powerfully rooted in the governments, whether right wing or left wing or centre, understanding the importance of the arts for society. We need educated politicians. That's hard, but we need to educate them. And the thing is that in the case of Mnouchkine, she's always been very clear who her masters were and how she learnt from them but differs from them. And I think that's vital. You know, in my book on Stanislavski, which is a revolutionary book, and it really is a revolutionary book, but not my invention. I found it all in the archives, thinking, reading, and as you heard me say the other day, going backwards from the contemporary directors and what I know about directors gave me great insight into understanding that Stanislavski produced these great artists, not just directors, but actors, scenographers, composers. He produced a huge number of amazing people. They all came out of that cauldron, bubbling and bursting, but they're all different. Yeah. And he didn't want them to be a copy, a model of himself. He wanted that difference. So again, you've asked a terribly important question that is extremely difficult to handle, but it can be done. Stanislavski spent his entire life fighting his partner, Nemirovich Danchenko, who was the managing director. And managing director was constantly on his back. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And he'd say, I have to do that. I'm part of this company. I created the actors. I have my area and you have yours. Let's agree to differ on these points, but give me the freedom to do what I need to do. And it worked. Yep. It all worked out. And that's another very empowering model to understand that the so-called system that Stanislavski created was not just there for everybody and they were all happy and then Stalin walked in and said, we're going to make this a proper national theatre. You know, that's the doxa. Yes. But it's not true. What is really important here is that it took time and effort and training of actors, what he called the development of the actors. And he had 7 studios in which to rehearse and you know, explore and experiment. And we need directors today who are not afraid to experiment, but also who experiment following through the vision that they formed and taking into account the social pressures, but in a sense not buckling under them. It's a tough job being a director. And anyway, the director is always wrong. that's, you know, that's the assumption. And unfortunately, if something goes wrong in a production, the director is the wrong one, because the director should have picked up the actor and seen this couldn't be done and worked his or her way through the problem so that it was somehow controllable and gave everybody the confidence to continue working. Directors have to have confidence. Yes. But the question is, how are you a confident director and not a tyrannical director? That's another big problem. Why is it that you always make me, you ask us a difficult question, you put me on the spot. I always believe, I've always taught my students, they have to answer a question properly, not just and then sit back. Answer it fully, like a dancer. A dancer doesn't do two steps. You have to do that, but yes. You see, you're a temptation for me.
Thank you. You started, one of the characteristics that you talked about, Brooke, was this ensemble theater, which in your book about Stanislavski has its own particular chapter as a very important innovation that Stanislavski brought.
It was.
How in the 21st century, when the actor, the artistic team is pressured from every part of their life, how do you build a new ensemble theater for a director? And how does the director build this ensemble?
I think that is for every theatre company, every theatre, managers, directors, sponsors, whoever is involved to sort out together. Because I don't think that today, which is so diverse, so full of stress, so full of tension, how in a world of such anxiety, with such pressures, such losses, all these things that we know, how indeed can directors work? It can only be worked out, I think, in very concrete, specific situations. Most directors that I know amongst the younger generation don't want to do ensemble theatre. It's too much hard work. They want faster results. They want to keep their jobs. They want to find the actors who aren't swallowed up by Netflix, you know, what do you call those serials on television, quick fix movies, or even strong and powerful movies, of which there are many still today, thank God. I don't feel I can speak for directors in this point, just to point out that I'm very aware of their difficulty, and I feel very strong sense of compassion for the situation that is making itself so difficult for them to establish some sense of that communal drive that makes an ensemble company work. But look, this theatre still has an ensemble company.
It does.
They don't come in and out. They're working together. I would hope that in 10 years' time, you and I can be talking and saying, it's lasted these last 10 years. It can keep that model, because that model, I actually think now, is the best model. It's the best because, listen, the big money makers of this world, how they all talk about teamwork. It's team, 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 team. Plural answers. The doctors talk about teamwork. The surgeons all talk about coming together and solving a problem. I've seen them do this recently personally, when I had to see one specialist and another, and they were all busy talking. Now, if the medical people can keep teamwork, and the big money bags, the big makers talk about teamwork, why in the name of God is the theatre then asked to disperse its teamwork? Why? It's a contradiction. Yeah. They can manage, and what, the theatre can't? When the theatre can be such a powerful instrument. I was talking about this the other day. We underestimate the power of the theatre. Why? Partly because it's drilled into our head again and again that it's entertainment, it's fun, fun, a good night out. A good night out is a quintessential, wonderful British expression. Well, we go out for a good night out. But the theatre is more than a good night out. The theatre is about the world and us. And if we realize that, the theatre can be explosive for how we live in the world. But it needs time, and it needs education. And we have to provide the education also for people. That's just more work also for a director, because I think it would be very good if directors could go out to schools and talk about this. How do we make a play? What is it to work in a theatre? How do we bring actors together? How are actors asked to be if they're going to be an ensemble? How are you all children? We could start with little kiddies.
Yes.
How do you all feel about playing together in the playground? But that's where you see teamwork with little children. They're all together in a playground, pulling together. Now, why are we going to grow up and become silly when little kids are smart? Do you see what I'm saying? It's big, it's big. It's big.
You mentioned Robert Icke, which is one of the, let's say, youngest but quintessential directors. He's also kind of playwright who adapts
He does.
the text from Sophocles, from Shakespeare. Many of his plays, his adaptations are also staged in Romania. And I want to ask you, how does this relationship, internal relationship of the director-dramaturg works? And then the difference of this director-dramaturg and the director that stages texts written by somebody else.
Sorry, I missed that because of the noise. The last phrase.
And then the difference with the director that only stages texts written by somebody else.
Somebody else. I think this is a fantastic question because it's quintessentially modern. Think back. Shakespeare was an actor and a writer. That's a marvelous model. Then we lose track of this. Then we get people like Bernard Shaw, who have no idea about the theatre, but are busy interfering in it. Or we get Chekhov, who doesn't know about the theatre, but has this God-given gift, I don't know, some kind of something or other, sat on his head, and he wrote the most amazing plays that we still do today because they still speak over time to people. And then we have people like Gorky, who comes in, writes his theatre, gives them over to Stanislavski, but doesn't really know. He trusts him, gives it over. But these modern directors are a different kettle of fish because they are pluri-gifted, pluridisciplinary, and they understand how to write and they understand how to stage what they write. And Icke is one good example, but there are many others. There's a wonderful, they actually don't write plays so much, except for one, Benedict Andrews, who lives in Iceland, who has done remarkable work. I think he's he's not 39 anymore, he's probably about 50 now. But for many years he has written plays. I don't know whether they are actually played by other people. I have not had time to do this work. Yeah. But he has a very special feel for how to rewrite a play through the stage work. What do I mean? Because that's a very tricky issue today. It's a very tricky issue because Robert Icke, I saw his Romeo and Juliet, which I talked about in my speech. What did he do as a playwright? He keeps a lot of Shakespeare's text, but he repeats certain scenes. And then he writes in his own dialogue. So it becomes a hybrid of Shakespeare, textual, of Icke commenting on, and of Icke writing in. In the case of Benedict Andrews, the writing in is more subtle. It slips in. You don't quite, I saw recently, he did a cherry orchard in the Donmar Playhouse. He slips in, it slipped in. If you don't know the Chekhov play well, as I do, you don't notice that it isn't Chekhov. But I noticed it was not Chekhov. But it was beautifully melded together. It was within not the tone, but the sense of the dialogue, because the tone was different. Chekhov's tone, very subtle, subdued, but also powerful. You have to know how to do Chekhov, otherwise it's a disaster. In Icke's case, in Benedict Andrews' case, it was in the smallness of the intimacy of the playing, of the actors and spectators being in the same small space, a kind of chamber theatre. They were sitting and chatting and talking. It was one of the best examples I've seen ever of this chatting, talking, we are not playing a play approach. It rarely works well. This worked brilliantly. And they were doing their thing, but not playing to us, playing among us, but not playing at us either. So the dialogue that Benedict Andrews wrote in to the Cherry Orchard was mostly through the kind of language used, through the contemporary swearing, unnecessary number of four-letter words. We didn't have to have so many to prove to us you were modern. Thank you very much. Even King Charles will say the F word, but we don't need too much of it. So it was done through language, through the use of the idiom, and through the use of contemporary idiom, in the context of an atmosphere that was totally domestic and small, of the kind we get in Chekhov. We don't need to be there, but often that is the best way of doing it. So there's another example. Yeah. Then there's a third example. There is, for example, Simon Stone, who's an Australian director, came out of Adelaide, made a huge impact in the Barbican in the 2010s with The Wild Duck, Ibsen. And he has soared ever since. He's never yet, to my knowledge, done a Shakespeare. I think that would be asking a lot of him. But he has done, all kinds of, some Greek Medea. He did a magnificent Medea put into a completely modern setting. He, I think, I can't swear to this, but I have said that somebody invented, because I started using it myself before I knew that another director was using it too. Or rather, I'm not a director, but that a director was using it. He was using the word overwrite. Mm-hmm. How you overwrite a text. So you're putting a layer on it, which is not Shakespeare, but you writing with Shakespeare. It's almost like a layered structure. Now, is that playwriting or isn't it? You see, this is the question. I don't know. We know he writes separate plays. But this overwriting is another kind of phenomenon. It's another approach by young directors. I think Simon Stone must be early 40s, so he's still a young director. I'd have to check his age, I've forgotten. We have another example of a young director trying to work out how to be a director, to work with a pre-written text, but to actually, at the same time, write his own text through the performance. It's a big job. Yeah. It requires a particular kind of skill, I think, to do. And then there are directors, I'm just trying to think of directors who are writing plays separately and then worrying about, do they always stage their own plays? No, they don't. Mm-hmm. They'll always get another director. But these are director writers. Yes. And that's a new phenomenon, actually, for the modern world, because the 19th century sort of faded it away a little bit. And we're seeing the re-emergence of a model, which is a Renaissance model. Shakespeare, Molière are the great two examples, of course. And then in Russia, let me just think. Ostrovsky, maybe, might be taken as example. It's a kind of modern phenomenon that we have to look at closely and study and see what it's doing and where it's going. We need to trace it and track it. That's one way of approaching the question you asked me. Yeah. What do you think about it? Can I turn it back to you?
You can turn it back to me, of course. Well, talking from the experience of the Romanian theater scene, we have this new institution of the dramaturg director, of the playwright director, but what goes to my next question is that these theater directors write the plays that they want to stage. They're not taking as a basis well-known classical playwrights, and there is this question that I want to pose to you: if these kind of texts are limited to the performances that produced them, or it can be taken up by other directors and be staged by another vision, by another director.
They have to let it go, these kind of writer-directors. Dramaturg directors have to let it go. They have to let the dramaturgy go to another director. And they have to sit quietly and think, I wouldn't do it like that, but they have to say, it's this director's vision, not mine. We have to have that freedom. Otherwise, we're stuck. You know, otherwise, that dramaturg director will have all kinds of copyright issues with his concurrent who is making a different kind of play. It could be troublesome. I would hope that in the future, if we see this developing more and more, that these dramaturg directors have the good grace to let their babies go.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Then everybody will be reasonably happy, yes. We hope, and not fighting each other.
But what in the case of the auto-reflective playwright that puts its own biography and story in this place? How does this letting go work? Can it work?
It won't work very well if it's going to be very much about them. But you see, that's an expression that we see more and more in our crazy, crazy world. A kind of closing in on oneself, a kind of narcissism of the director. A director cannot be narcissistic, I don't think. Even if it's your own baby. Because the theatre its power lies in its multiplicity within itself. Its power lies in its ability to speak to more than a small group, but to speak really to a heterogeneous audience. If people who are very adept at theatre like you or me are sitting there and we are laughing at the same thing, and the people who have come for the first time, who might have been lucky to have had a teacher who took them to the theatre when they were kids, so they've developed a habit of wanting to go to the theatre, and they are laughing too. They're two different kinds of audiences, laughing at the same thing. There's a sharing of understanding of the same thing. There might be huge differences in what they take away from that sharing, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that the theatre focuses on more than that one individual. So I don't know how that will pan out in time. We will see it. Or whether, in fact, this kind of writing about oneself is going to ever make long-lasting, powerful theatre. Is it going to become a passing thing that just dies quietly? Because think back yourself to the great poets, the great directors, the great choreographers, the great dancers. They think beyond their ego. Their work, look, a great dancer like Nureyev loved his dance passionately. He was a huge ego maniac. He was a powerful, in a way, in many ways, tyrannical dancer with a sense of perfection that was cruel for anyone not as good as he. Few were as good as he. Not necessarily technically. Technically, he was not necessarily the best dancer. But what made him become this great figure in the world of dance was the heart and soul, the power of feeling in him. You know, he dances that scene in Giselle when he comes to the graveyard. And Giselle's buried, and, you know, all those ghosts are going to come soon into the dance. Even now, remembering it, I have goose pimples running up my arms, because the clarity of emotion is so strong and communicates itself, even on a film, so powerfully that you forget the ego maniac who was perhaps this great dancer. You see that no ego is involved in the dancing. None.
Yeah.
It's all embedded in the process of becoming through the dance. The theatre has to remember this. The theatre directors and actors need to go and see more incredible dancing. They need to go and see some really good opera. It's much harder in the opera to be a director. Well, that's another story, because I'm passionately interested in opera directors. But I'm trying to show you, I suppose, that I can't give you simple answers here.
Of course.
Because it's an incredibly complicated field.
Yeah.
So I don't know how can I predict? I can't predict. I have to watch for the next 10 years what happens to those plays that are so much about themselves. The greatest, in my view, I think I'm coming to this conclusion only now. Yeah. By now I mean in these last years as I grow older, and pull together this great fortune I've had of seeing some of the most amazing work in history. Yeah. I've becoming more and more to the conclusion that the I, the ego in the artwork actually blends into the artwork, and that perhaps you say most about yourself as an artist when you're not talking directly about yourself. Now do you see where I'm taking you?
Yeah.
It's like people asked me recently to talk a little bit about myself, and I said, there's nothing to talk about. Read my books. My students hear my voice. They know exactly who I am from the voice and from what I'm writing. That is me, but I'm not talking about me. I don't push myself forward in that book. I'm quietly hidden somewhere. Yeah. And I don't attack anyone I don't agree with. I could, because I really disagree with some of the stuff. But I do it gently, yeah. Because beneath the gentle approach is a kind of truthfulness. And you don't have to stress it. People will see it or they won't see it. And I can't make anyone see something they don't want to see. And we can't, anyway, generally.
Of course.
Isn't that right? In just daily life, we can't.
Yeah. You talked about the importance of the master. The epilogue of your book on rediscovering Stanislavski, you write about the connection between Stanislavski and all the important directors and what they took from him as an access, as an evolution from Stanislavski to them. And then in your experience, you followed great directors and then their students, them becoming the master of the next generation. And I want to ask you, as Stanislavski was in a way the master of the 20th century director, who could be, which would be masters of the 21st?
I don't know. I have to think about this one. You see, there was a time where you could not say master in Britain. You still can't really. Mm-hmm. People get annoyed. What's a master? I'm as good as you are. Yeah. I think it doesn't have to be as crude as that. I recognize a master when I see one or hear one. And I respect that master because that master has given me fantastic joy in the beauty of the work. What's wrong with that? It's not a matter of being privileged or this or that. It's a matter of recognition. But a matter of recognition is also a matter of generosity. And it has to be based on experience. You can only recognize a master when your heart is ready to have seen it. And that depends on how much you've been exposed to some of the great people of the world. I am very thankful to have met these great masters because they have given me a kind of awareness I would not have had without them. I would have just been maybe a bog-standard academic, not an academic who steps out of the field and looks like she doesn't quite belong in it because she's in several fields. But that's been very important for the writing of academic books, as it has been important for journalistic style reviewing. Different kind of writing, but the impetus has come from the same person. Yeah. So I don't know about the future and the masters of the future, or who they might be or how they might remain. But something I must say is that many of those directors would not say they had learned from Stanislavski. Yeah. For example, I quote, I think, a very wonderful director. I would love to see him at Craiova one day, but he doesn't do Shakespeare. And that is, I've gone blank, I'm tired. It'll come back to me. He's in my book. Yeah. He's a Belgian director, worked very much in Poland during the COVID period and got sick with COVID too, as did some of his actors. It'll come back to me later, his name. Now, in the book I cite him saying, Stanislavski gave the actor freedom. That's what we owe him. But that's all he wants to say about Stanislavski. Sometimes a director doesn't have to know who his master was. It'll come maybe to his awareness later. They're not all like Mnouchkin, who will say right from the beginning, these are my masters. Peter Brook was a very reticent person, very cautious, not on his theatre work, but in his interpersonal relations. He would not talk about masters. He never says that he learned anything from Stanislavski. But when you see how he worked with his actors, and you go backwards from the present to the past like I did, it is mind-blowing how much he picks up the threads. Maybe, as I said in a talk the other day, it's not necessarily obvious influence. I used to speak about the dust of history falling, but that's not good enough. Now I realize that's not enough to say. What we need to say is something about, I found myself saying it when we were talking about this book, Rediscovering Stanislavski. It's realizing that somehow the contemporary directors have got there all by themselves. And it takes somebody who knows this and that to see the connection. Maybe they don't see it. If you said to Robert Wilson, for example, you learned something, I would never actually say, because he didn't. But he nevertheless said, I don't believe you, to his actors. Yeah. Now that's a quintessentially Stanislavskian phrase. How in the name of God does a Robert Wilson, who hates all that kind of theatre, who hates characters, who doesn't want to know anything about psychological theatre, who doesn't work like that and doesn't think like that and does the great theatre that he does. Why is he telling his people, I don't believe you, when they're just walking up and down a stage? The walk isn't believable. Do you see how subtle that is? Yeah. So maybe it's those contemporary directors whom I have studied, maybe they've got there by another path. And it might just say something about, see, Ariane Mnouchkin speaks about the laws of theatre. Robert Icke wouldn't speak about the laws of the theatre. Simon Stone wouldn't speak about the laws of the theatre. There are many who would say, what's that? There are no laws and no rules. But maybe, rather than laws, what we're discovering in the modern world is something about the potential and possibilities of theatre making, which are vast. And it so happens that they cross paths. It might not be a direct influence, but you can see the signs of somebody else present. I think that is a marvelous thing about the theatre. It's like in music. You know, Max Richter writing his music. Is anyone going to say he was a student of Bach? We wouldn't. But sometimes something in that music is very like Bach. So what is it? It's this coincidence of merging threads. And that says something about humanity. It says something about a kind of, not even cultural memory. It's bigger than a cultural memory. It's like a, where are the words for this? It's like a spirit that somehow regenerates itself in different places through different people. It's quite massive to think of it in those terms. And I don't know where to go with this, except that it's like a blazing insight, at least for me. Because what do we say when there's a marvelous section in that last chapter, which you will have noticed, where Brooke talks about Grotowski and stresses the distinction between the two of them. And they were close. But he stresses the distinction between them. And it's a very powerful reflection. But then, what I started thinking was, but Grotowski comes out of the teacher who was directly Stanislavski's student. And Grotowski said his master was Stanislavski, which everybody fell over with. But who is this man who has no, doing what he does? How can he say his master was Stanislavski when he's got nothing to do visibly with that master? But what it was the inner soul of the actor. And the truthfulness of that inner soul on stage. It doesn't have to embody a character. It can just be that actor. And it's still Stanislavski.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's when you realize how amazing the theatre is. I think that's at least when I really started to realize, after I finished my book, how amazing the theatre is.
Great. Our time has run out, unfortunately, but thank you so much again for accepting this invitation and for this talk. And
I think we'll have to pick up this talk again, because this one grows from the other one.
Exactly.
And I hope to heaven that I don't stop growing. That's what I really hope. Because if you stop growing, you stop. And there's still so much to learn. So thank you for letting me say all this, because this is all post that last talk.
Yeah.
It's a whole new dimension of my thinking,
Yes.
which I haven't put anywhere on paper. So when we finish, I'm going to ask you if you could give me the transcript. I think we should preserve this.
Yes.
Because I might not be able to say it again. Because as you know, and then I suppose we really have to stop, as you know, here is the ensemble work between us.
Yeah.
And I could not have said this, maybe, to anyone else but you. Oh dear.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll change back to Romanian for a second. Vă mulțumim din nou foarte mult că ne urmăriți aici la Interviurile Teatrul Azi. Acesta a fost ultimul interviu din cea de a 6-a zi de interviuri din Festivalul Shakespeare de la Craiova. Vă așteptăm mâine la alte 3 interviuri de la ora 11, 12:30 și 15:30. Vă mulțumim!